get hit in their penis when they're at a sports game, that they're allowed to tell you about it, and that they're allowed to say that something hurts, because this is a good part of their body that we're not afraid to talk about as a family. And obviously you're talking about that. That's not something that you're supposed to be talking about with other people, but that this is something that you have as a sacred space that inside the family is the school of love, John Paul II said. This is where they're going to school with you. And Jason likes to say, if we don't speak to our teenagers about their sexuality and our kids about sexuality, the world will fill our silence with a very contrary message. And you have to remember, and I have to remember, that even if we have a good Catholic family and a good Catholic community, that from the time your child is 3 years old and you walk through the grocery store with them, that they are looking at Maxim magazine and at Cosmopolitan magazine, and they are receiving a message about sexuality without a context. And if I don't give them that context, they will be misinformed. So what does that mean? It means that I do talk to my 6-year-old about sexuality in the proper sense of what that means. What does that look like? When we're walking through the grocery and she's in the checkout line with me, I can't live like this, can I? You can't do that. You just can't live that way. And so what is it? The world is your classroom where you continue to engage in that conversation. And so as she looks over at that magazine and you see her staring at it, you say, "Sweetie, did you see the way that woman was dressed?" And you ask her a question. And she says yes. And you say, "I don't think that woman knows how beautiful and special her body is. Do you?" Why? Because we don't. Mommy doesn't dress like that, does she? No. Why doesn't she dress like that? Because our body is so sacred and we have to actually veil it. We have to put something over it, right? To shield it and help everybody understand how special it is. And at that level, what does she understand? Who are the people that are supposed to see her naked? Her parents and her doctor. Like, that's it. And that's not the inside of this context, she starts to understand something. I'm driving down into New Orleans, which is where I live. And that means I have to drive down the interstate that has 5, 6, 8 different billboards that are salacious. Different levels of it, different places, strip clubs, whatever it might be. If I see in the rearview mirror that my son has seen that, and he's 9 years old, now he's 9, we've been having these kind of conversations for the last 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, I'm not pointing him out to him. But if I think he's seen it, I'm asking him a question. So that every time a misinformed, a malign message about sexuality comes into my family, I'm doing my very best to correct it and to show the proper context for it. So as we're having those conversations all the way along, when we do finally get to that 10, 11, whatever the right moment would be for your children, and let's say this before we go further, you're the only one who knows what that right moment is for your child. Don't ask me. Don't ask me what the right moment is for you to have the conversation. If you're talking with your children and you're watching them grow, you will know what the right moment is. A couple of factors to consider. Are they going to find out from somebody else before they find out from you? We should not be playing catch up. You should not be having the second conversation because they already heard all the wrong message from somebody at school. They already heard the wrong message because we maybe let them spend the night at somebody's house we shouldn't have let them spend the night at. Sleepovers are dangerous, right? They're beautiful if it's in the right context, and they're very dangerous if they're not. Because all kinds of things can happen that we can't control. And so if they hear all the wrong message, now what's happening is they're coming back to us and they're hearing the second version from us. And now trying to see, they're measuring what they have first heard that they maybe received and thought was the truth against something new. It should be the other way around. It should be that they hear the truth first from us and they measure everything else they hear against that message. That's how it works. Now, I know that if we were to take that to the extreme, it would mean that we're having to have these conversations with our 5-year-olds all the time because of us being afraid they're going to, have something else happen, and that's not correct either. But for us to watch them as they're growing, and sometimes that might mean us having the conversation earlier than we think. You're watching your children, and you have it at the level at which they can have it in. A couple of tips for that we have, that you practice with your husband or your wife, right? I mean, I'll be honest with you. This was the most nervous talk I ever gave. My first conversation with my first son, I felt it was difficult for me, and I talk about this all the time. But it was because I didn't want to mess it up. It wasn't because I was afraid of what to say. It It was because I knew it was such an important thing, and I wanted it to be right. And so I was praying. I'll share with you how I did it. I went on a camping trip with him. And so it wasn't the normal thing. It wasn't like, we're just eating dinner, and then I pull him in a room, and something comes out of nowhere that rearranges my life. It was being set up by a memory and an experience that he'll go back to later, where we went and I said, hey, we're going to have this time to explore what it means to be a man this weekend, And so I let him, pick the foods he wanted to bring, and we did fishing, and we did hiking, and it was just he and I in a cabin, and I'm just praying, Lord, show me when and how you want me to do this. I didn't have a word-for-word plan, and if you need a word-for-word plan, that's good, but I didn't need that. I just needed the right time. And so I was praying, and so I'm helping him build a fire. I'm teaching him how to build a fire, and we're building a fire, and we finished building the fire, and now we're sitting around the fire. It's like 10 o'clock at night, and he goes, Dad, tell me a story. I said, here we go. And I was like, St. John Paul II, come here. And he was sitting down near the fire, and Mary was sitting near the fire, and St. Joseph was rubbing my back, and going in there. This is the opportunity. And so for me, that ended up being a 10-minute conversation. It was 10 minutes where I kind of morphed the story of Adam and Eve and the story of Brian and Lisa together. That was how I did it. And I shared this about how God gave us the gift of sexuality and how God gave him the gift of his life. And I pulled them together in 10 minutes. And 10 minutes later, he asked some funny questions. He giggled. He did, the things that children are going to do, right? We need to make sure that they feel okay to have whatever their response is, it needs to be okay. We can't shame them for the fact that they're going to giggle. They should be giggling, because this is weird. They're not there, and so they should be free to that. If they go, and they have some dramatic, let them have it. Let them have that reaction. Don't let them have it. let them have their own reaction and have freedom there, because if they are free, they're going to feel more confident to come back to you over and over again with questions. If some response that they give, they feel is wrong, then they're going to be more likely to shut down and not come back to you. Right? And if we make it super serious, I'm about to tell you something that we've never talked about, and you need to understand this, and it's something that we don't talk about with anybody else. We're going to be done in a little while, and if you have questions later, and it's like this, oh my gosh, what is going to happen? We're all stressing out. We need to be frank. Don't beat around the bush and say something because they're not nuanced. They don't understand nuance. You have to be specific, and you have to be frank, but reverent, right? And joyful. This is beautiful. All these are things they're going to see in and through your face, and in through the way that you speak, in the language that you choose. That's why I said practice with your spouse. Talk with them. What are your ideas? What do you think I should say? What would you do? How are the first ways that you would share this? And so when we go in and we share with our spouse and we prayed up, and we share that first experience when they're ready to be finished with that first experience. So for me, it was 10 minutes later, and he said, Dad, tell me another story. You're done. You're out. When they're done, and they've received, and now their little mind is got enough, that's enough. I would highly recommend that you then, in the next couple of days, revisit, so that they understand this is not something that you're going to, and actually I said this specifically to my son, today I'm going to talk to you about something that we're going to get a chance, this is going to be the first time that we get a chance to talk about something special that we've never talked about before, but that we'll get a chance to explore for the rest of our lives together. That's a very different situation than feeling like I'm having one talk, and now everything else is on that one math course, and for me to go become an engineer. So, when I revisited with him later that night, we're going to bed, and I said prayers with him. I revisited it in our prayers right then. And we're able to talk about this and show him something that we're going to continue to grow together with. And when I took him on a camping trip the next year, there was a father-son trip. We revisited certain things and had lots of, conversations about it. And it wasn't a year in between that I didn't talk about anything in between, but I'm saying that there are special times where we can talk about it more specifically than others, that we initiate not only in reaction to the TV or reaction to what was said at school, but because we know it's important enough that we want to share the beautiful teaching with our children. Is this making sense so far? Yeah. Okay, so when it comes, we do have another seat in the front if somebody needs 2 seats up there. So, some of you know more than others about what the church teaches about sexuality. Some of you have heard the term theology of the body, but don't really know what it means. Some of you have learned a lot about it. I want to encourage you to take up a study. Encourage you personally to take up a study about what this message is, so that the more and more that you imbibe it into your... The second is that we recognize that the level to which we are generous with our own sexuality and our families, that document, Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality, when it's referencing natural family planning and the church's teaching there, it says that the more generous that we are with our families and the way that we live out our own sexuality, that there's a direct connection to the more generous that our children will be in following God in their call of life. In other words, more priests and more religious and more faithful marriages are born from a faithful marriage. The faithful marriage is the seedbed of every single vocation. Every single one comes from a marriage, comes from a family. And that's one of the beautiful gifts of your movement, of your community. Just because it's good to learn in a few different ways. Because integration of my sexuality happens in all different kinds of ways of my life. So it's important, not just a good idea, it's important to play basketball with your son as a part of physical exertion and love, and showing masculine exertion in that space as a part of his integration of masculinity and what you taught him in another realm. Those things are connected. So when we do camps, this is a ball that's a little promotional item that's about ECHO, which is our camp on theology of the body. I'm going to show you a little video at the end of the presentation about it. We have one coming up in 2 weeks in Ohio for anybody that's up in the Northeast or wants to send their kids there. Sexuality. Maybe you saw in the last 6 months, Facebook just came out with 50 different ways to describe your sexuality. Instead of male or female, you now have 50 different ways you can describe yourself. Okay? So that means we're incrementally going further and further away from one man made for one woman for life. And you know this, but it's not just an issue anymore. It's become, in my opinion, the issue that we must be able to speak on with charity and with clarity. It needs to have both, right? So we must be bold, but we must be compassionate. Let's go back to the parent question first. And even for those of us who have children, and we have not seen that in our own families. That document, The Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality, is clear that we should not be speaking about homosexuality with pre-adolescence unless we have to. The reason that the church teaches that is that our children need to learn, our children need to learn first what sexuality is about and what God's plan for it is before they start learning about the aberrations. Does that make sense? They have to first be formed in understanding what God's plan is before they start having any aberrations, as family is not like ours at all, and they have so those struggles can bring things in. But the church is saying to us on the first level to say we're not supposed to be bringing that up with our pre-adolescents until we have already given them all of what we need to have regarding God's plan from the beginning of how He did create us to live. Secondly, what we need to remember, no matter who we're talking about, is that God did not create homosexuality. Right? God created everything and saw that it was good, right? And so all of the sexuality that He created of masculinity and femininity is good. Homosexual desires are one of a billion different forms of concupiscence, right? Homosexual tendencies are one of a billion different ways that the human person's desires for God, right, have become twisted in some way. Remember, what is the deepest desire of the human heart? For God. It's the deepest thing. At the very bottom of what we desire is communion with Him. John Paul II said in Love and Responsibility, he said that our sexual desires are not at the bottom of our hearts. At the bottom of our hearts, the deepest desire of the human heart is to be in communion and to make a gift of ourselves. And that only finds its outlet in and through sexual desire. Okay? Very important distinction. That's not our deepest level. Our deepest level is that we're called to union with God, and that finds an outlet in and through our desire. I want to do a very quick role play. Can I show you a very quick demonstration to help show this for just a moment? George, would you stand up here for a moment? Would you be God for me for just a second? Can I have a woman that would mind coming up here for just a moment? Stand in for a role play? You get to be Eve. Any woman? Can I volunteer you? Okay. So if you would face me for just a moment. Okay, I'm Adam, you're Eve, George is God in this role play. Okay? And so when God created me, what I said to the kids earlier, if you were in there, was that He created me with a desire for God who was invisible. And how did that come to be? Be visible? In and through the sacramentality of the body. And in a particular way, I like to call this, God is the magnet. So His heart is made, St. Augustine told us this, my heart is restless until you have made me for yourself, O Lord, my heart is restless until it rests in you. But how does that happen? In this world, there's a huge desire between man and woman for the other. And at the very beginning, before the fall, Adam saw that his desire was not merely for Eve. He saw straight through her with purity of heart and saw that God was the one calling him to himself through her. That is a huge reality for us to understand. Can you swap with me for a moment? Eve understood when she was created at the very beginning, and she thought, pretend I'm cute and awesome, come this way. Okay? She knew at the very beginning that God was the one calling her to himself in and through the masculinity of Adam. She knew her heart was restless, and it was restless until it rested in God through Adam. She wasn't thinking, my heart's restless until it rested in Adam. Because it was a transparency here of the icon that God had made specifically to show me the truth, goodness, and beauty of Him, and to call her to Himself through me. Okay? Now, when she reached out and she took the low-hanging fruit and she ruined all of our lives, she takes the fruit, I take the fruit, and that original sin from that moment on, what John Paul teaches us is that all of these desires that were originally in place, that were true, good, and beautiful, become distorted. And so, homosexual desires is just one of all kinds of distortions from original sin. It's very important for us to remember that God did not create homosexuality. Now, what has the church said? Thank you all for coming up. Thank you so much. And so this becomes distorted within the heterosexual relationship, right? That now instead of a gift to be treasured and received, I'm tempted to grasp at her, I'm tempted to manipulate her, I'm tempted to use her. John Paul II says the opposite of love is not hate, the opposite of love is use. Using another person as an object rather than a subject to be loved. Okay? And so I'm trying to quickly get here to make this movement towards the fact that a homosexual desire, the church does not say conclusively the origin of where that person began to feel that. The church does not teach that. But we know it didn't come from God. We know that it came from concupiscence. Why? Because that desire is not for a good. It's a disordered desire. It's not ordered to my final end and toward being one with God. It's not ordered towards a good anymore. Since it's disordered, we know it didn't come from God. So the question then becomes after that, and we have to be very sensitive and very compassionate when it comes to this. Because what is the first line of defense now that's coming at us from is that if we say anything at all that's not just complete and total embracing of the gay lifestyle and of applauding it, that we are haters. That's what the first line coming back at us is. And it's really even moved, and I'm being serious about this, it's grown in the last 3 years. It's not even okay to just sit by now and just say nothing. Now it's being spoken of as the fact that you're not saying anything. Did you agree that that is okay? People are being asked that in the workplace. People are being pushed to these places. And very quickly we're going to discover, Ray's going to talk tonight about being a martyr. He's going to talk about the March of the Martyrs tonight for these young kids. And I believe that those young people right there are going to be, definitely in the white sense, and possibly in the red sense, are going to become martyrs over this issue. if they live out their sexuality as God has designed them to, and proclaim the truth of creation that is revealed to us in and through marriage, being the primordial sacrament that teaches us so much about who God is and who He wants us to be for Him. If that is the fundamental way that God has made us for one another, and that fundamental way is being destroyed left and right, the family is being destroyed left and right, the anti-sign of that sacrament is the homosexual relationship. It's the anti-sign. And it began with the contraceptive revolution, right? As soon as we start to take away procreation from unity and procreation from the same space, it's only a small step away to move into homosexual sex. In other words, when a married couple removes procreative and unitive from one another, I'm already giving credence and starting to move in the direction to say that sex can only be for recreation, that sex can only be for union and not have the other side. So, now to get to the actual language, what's very important is, I believe, that the very first thing out of our mouths at every single turn, no matter who it is, needs to be, I love you. I love you. And the same that we talked about earlier is still true for every single human person. That I am amazed by your dignity, I am grateful that you are here, and I love you and I always will. That needs to be the very first thing. The second thing is that we need to remember we're talking to specific people, not just to them. It's not them and us. If it becomes us and them, we're losing already. St. Ignatius of Loyola taught us that whenever you're in a dialogue with someone else who doesn't agree with you, he taught us to save the proposition of the other. And what that means is that you look and you listen. What is it that we agree on? You're looking for that and listening for that. And so he says, they say this thing out of their mouth, and we don't agree on that. They say this out of, we don't agree on that. And you're not trying to hold on to the things we disagree on. You're looking for what do we agree on. And then as soon as you find it, you hold on to it, and now you have something you can stand upon to have some further conversation. Right? If you have something you agree on. Now, what is the thing that we can generally agree on pretty quickly? The human heart is wrecked today. And we are experiencing a deep, deep ache in our hearts. And what is the ache for? The ache is not for sex. The ache is for love. And God is love. But we're not going to go to God yet necessarily, because that would dishonor where a person might be, right? Now, if we're talking about in our own families, that's a different conversation. But when oftentimes we're responding to someone else, and they might not even believe in God, or they might be very hurt by the church, I'm not going to speak about God first. I'm going to speak about what it is that they can see. Not the invisible they can't see, but the visible that they can see. That they see love right here. Right here in what they can see. They can taste that, experience that. So, I think that there's a perpetual discernment for every single conversation. Normally, how does that happen? A lot of times you've got between, 5 and 15 minutes in a personal conversation with somebody. You have to discern a lot as to what you're called to say and not say. And are you going to have opportunities with that person in the future? Because if you're going to have opportunities with them in the future, we should be building a relationship of trust with this person in order to be able to be heard later on. So let's not try to do everything in 10 minutes. That's one way to try to maybe intimidate somebody or kick them away. Let's go back to our own family though. If we're talking about somebody in our own family, I'm going to love you, and I'm going to respect you, and I'm going to treat you with the dignity of who you are. But let me help you to learn, especially if it's at young ages, if we discover something like this, that just because you have an attraction does not mean that you are something. We are not equivalent. Our identity is not equivalent with our desires. Amen. And so what has happened in the homosexual movement is that there has been a radical movement to take the desire and stamp it with an identity. And to say, I am this, I am that, and even that identity continues to change. You see all the letters that continue to build on one another? Like LGBTQF, like there's so many things. I'm being serious, and I'm not trying to joke about it. They're constantly trying to include another aberration, and then saying that that's our identity. We are the this movement. We are the this community. And it's not one thing. It's so many different things. Well, we're not equivalent with our desires, but we are equivalent with the identity of who we are and who we've been created in the image of. Now, obviously, that moves into a space of being created in the image and likeness of God. With our own kids, we should have been already teaching them about that. And they should already know that if they have some desire that's not in line with the church, they have a sinful temptation, that doesn't make them a sinner, does it? It does not make them a sinner to have a temptation, does it? No. We are not equivalent with our temptations. And our temptations, no matter how hard or dramatic they might be, do not necessarily taint our hearts. We could be tempted to steal from that kid next to us every day all school year. And if I resist that temptation, not only am I not sinning, I am becoming a saint. I am growing in virtue by ordering my desires. And we have to recognize that people who experience same-sex attraction actually have a great cross and actually have a great opportunity in sanctity. They have a great opportunity to be able to give that to Christ and to know that what has happened, what I said from the stage earlier, we were saved, we were redeemed, and our sexuality was redeemed. It is being redeemed now, and it will be fully redeemed in heaven. We never know how much of that progression is going to happen here on earth. We don't know. You and I, who may not have same-sex attraction, we don't know what other temptations you and I might have that we might wrestle with from now until the day we die. That could be the same thing could be true for a same-sex attraction. That attraction all the way till the day they die. But it would probably be minimized the more and more that our hearts become in line and in relationship with Christ. Right? Because the cross is not meaningless, it's efficacious. And it's efficacious not in just one part of our lives, but in all parts of our lives. And so, as we submit ourselves to that, we start learning about living chastity even inside of a distraction or a temptation. And there are a number of people, yes, that have been restored to have their their sexual desires be purely toward the opposite sex. But there are other people who have continued to be afflicted to some degree, and to such a great degree maybe that they really should live celibacy. But there are other people who have had that minimized to such a degree that they are able to have a happy marriage with some temptations in the other direction. And that is what a beautiful place for sanctification. That inside of that, and honest, open and honest from the get-go with the spouse, right? Not something that's hidden and later on coming out. But that can be a beautiful place of sanctification. To continue to live chastity and to say yes to love and all of its demands. Do I have a great 5-minute elevator speech that I could just, for this issue? I don't. But I think there's a reason for that. Not just because I don't know a great list, but I think because the Holy Spirit wants to meet each person with this in a different way. And the hurts are in different areas. And so our call is to discern and ask the Holy Spirit to speak in this moment, this way, today. And that could sometimes mean I speak by just embracing that person. Sometimes it might not be any words at all. We have to remember that there's not an obligation that we have to convert everyone, but with our words, number one. And number two, that we are often evangelizing just with the language of our bodies and the way that we care about someone. If someone were to come to us and were to come out of the closet, what an amazing word would they have. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, it's just an idea. What amazing word would they have if all we did was cry with them and hold them? And they walked away from that experience and the only word that was spoken was one of love in and through the body. I was so overwhelmed that it was pouring out of my eyes for you and for the hurt that must be in your heart. You can't ignore that. You can't ignore that. So it's a very big issue, and I don't think there's any one way to go about it. Obviously, when you get further into the conversations of arguing or trying to speak the truth because of back and forth, you can read some books on that and talk about all the biology that's ordered. Everything inside of a man is ordered toward a woman, whether or not their desires feel that or not. A woman is ordered for a man, even if she doesn't feel like it. Her, her ovaries are oriented toward a man. Like everything inside of her body is oriented that way. It's basically a denial that we get to because of our concupiscence, where we start to just say anything goes. So, thank you for that question. In the workplace and in public life, in the public square, what are we called to and what are we not called to? Well, the first thing that we know we're called to is to imitate Christ and to be an image of Him in that place. Now that looks a lot of different things. Sometimes Jesus went in the temple with a cord and he was angry, right? Because something was being defaced and it was being desecrated, and the right response was one of righteous anger in that particular place. But we also have to remember that Jesus maybe wasn't married, didn't have 5 kids that were depending upon that job. And so there's lots of things. I'm being serious, right? And so what we constantly have to discern is, Lord, what are you calling me to today? Remembering that my primary responsibility is to my husband and to my children. And that's what I'm called, those are the people that I'm called to teach the most. And so that is my place to be able to speak. And I think that sometimes we probably are meant to say a prayer. It's not doing nothing. Let's remember that praying is not doing nothing, right? That if we are to offer our sacrifices and to fast and to do all the things in quiet that the Father sees that no one else sees, that is doing something great for the people that are near us that maybe are celebrating all the things that we wish they weren't. And that can be a great gift to the church, a great gift to humanity, a great gift to God. Are there times when we're pushed against the wall or when we're asked a question that we might be called to walk into that space of martyrdom, whatever it might look like? I think there will be. I know there will be. Because this is not only questioning about what their relationships is about. This is questioning about all of what humanity is about. What do we believe? We believe that God called us to become one with Him. And the marriage between one man and one woman is the sign that points us to that. If that's what we believe, if that's what's true, then we have to be ready to defend that the same way we're ready to defend, in a particular way, and I realize I'm being dramatic here, the same way that we're ready to defend Jesus Christ. Why? Because it is the gospel. This is the gospel. Now, this is a moral issue as well, but at the base, it's in relation to the gospel message. So will there be times when maybe we are called to not say anything out in public because of the fact that I need this job to hold my children's, to be able to do this, and Christ's name was being defaced, and I allowed it to be defaced, and I allowed my heart to be pierced and to be broken with Him, and that I don't say anything out loud? That's entirely possible that we would be called to that. But it's also possible that we would be called to step out and to have the crucifixion, so to speak, happen on the outside. I think that that's a discernment we would constantly be in with our spouse. If it's something that's regularly happening in your life, and to discern, is this where I'm called to continue to be? What will we do if something happens? And to be in communication about that, to not be surprised by it, to be ready for it. Right? St. Timothy says that always be ready to proclaim the reason for your hope to anyone who asks. Always be ready. Now maybe you're not called to do it, but be ready in case you are. Of that puberty freight train that did that I was telling you about. And so we have to be careful to recognize that can be part of that movement towards integration. But when we're talking about something that's deep-seated and ongoing, we know that God did not create that. That God created a person in His image and likeness, and they're ordered toward everything in their body says they are ordered towards the opposite sex. And so we can be confident of that. We don't need to shove down the throat that they're not being honest about the fact that they felt that way since they were 3. Is it possible that they have felt that way since as early as they can remember? Absolutely. That's absolutely possible. And many of the reasons for that are that there are all kinds of things that psychologists who are honest about things say that happen in those early 0 to 3 years that can change things in a young person and how they think about themselves and how they think about the world and how they think about their relationships with the same sex or the opposite sex. So that we can't go further than the church. Let's remember that. We shouldn't step further than the church steps. The church doesn't say, we can't say, it's never been proven that there's a gay gene. There's no evidence out there that's ever said that. No, it's never been done. Everybody assumes it because there's a tidal wave of public opinion that's moving that direction because all the movie stars say it. It must be true. And so that we have to remember that so we can be confident of the fact that it's very likely for most people, or for a whole lot of people, that it is a nurture thing. But even if it wasn't, even if it was something that they felt from the moment since the beginning of their life, or as early as they can remember, it's still not because God made them that way. It's a result of original sin. It's a result of concupiscence. And there is a big difference. Do we see that? More than the Major League Baseball combined. It's making more money than that combined. And so it's eating our children alive. The average age of exposure to pornography right now is 11. That's the average. That means that there are plenty of people that are receiving it earlier than that. And so some quick things to know as parents, first of all. I won't ask you to raise your hands, but I will ask a critical question of all of us in here. How many of us have filters that are on all the screens that our kids are looking at home? Okay, let's honestly ask ourselves and talk to our spouses on the way out of here. How many of us recognize that there is something very dangerous that's about to possibly come through that screen and that we should be, as parents, protecting our children from it? We would not allow somebody to walk in with a loaded gun in our house, would we? We would not allow drugs into our house, would we? But sometimes we are, not intentionally, letting pornography into our children's bedrooms, letting them into our family room, letting them into the house and into our screens. And young people now have pornography in their pocket.
Yeah.
So what used to happen, where you had to go to the store and you had to ask for something or have somebody go buy it for you, literally, people now have it in their pocket. And it's now, we now have a generation that's in their 20s that's been having that in their pocket for the last 10, 12 years, 15 years. Okay, so I don't think we have to build the drama anymore as to what a colossal issue it is if we're honest with ourselves. When we talk about sexuality with our children, and we're having that first talk, or like I said earlier, when you are driving down the freeway or seeing those magazines, you are already educating about pornography in the soft way, right? The soft core pornography. You're already doing that when you're educating and teaching about what's good and true and beautiful. And there is a place at the table that mothers have with their sons, and there's a place at the table that fathers have with their daughters when it comes to, and both with their same sex, when it comes to this issue and when it comes to modesty, right? That we are able to teach them confidently about the fact that pornography is a destruction of the human person, because it takes apart, it tries to take merely the sexual values from the person, and it reduces them to pieces and parts. And so a man, particularly on the male side, gets trained over and over again to see a woman as pieces and parts. And he is so visual that as that continues to happen every time he looks at pornography, and when he looks at a woman in a page that way, or when he looks at her on a screen that way, and then he looks at the woman in front of him that way, it's very difficult to not look at her the same way he's been looking at her all along. And so we have to remember that there's not a separation here between those women and these women. It is, how do we look at women, period? How do we look at man, period? And are we able to have the gaze be purified that we might see with the eyes of Christ? Now, we're not afraid of the body. One of the principles that I use when I'm talking to teenagers, and you can use this with your kids, if you're going to the beach, if you're going to all kinds of places where it would be said this is soft-core pornography that could be happening, or at least extreme modesty, is the face-first principle. Not to be afraid of seeing the person in their body, because their body is beautiful. And because even the body naked before God is beautiful. The Sistine Chapel is glorious, right? Because it's the person before God in their body. But if I look at the face first, that's where the windows to the soul are. And I see not only a body, I'm able to better connect with a person in and through their body, in and through their face, than I do if I'm looking at your elbow. That's true about any other part of our body that faces a particular awakening, and a child doesn't wake to their mother and father by looking at their shoulder. They wake to their, I'm serious, this is science, they wake when they see them in their face, when they see their eyes. So teach them the face first principle, to try to always order their own gaze to see the face first, whether the person is dressing modestly or immodestly. If they encounter something pornographic, or if there's a person dressed for church, that you see their face first before you encounter the rest of their masculinity or femininity. Secondly, that we are able to not only have those filters, right, but also remember that children are usually 3 steps ahead of us with technology. And that means that they can get around the filters. And so we need to be careful that we have computers like in the family area of the house. I would recommend never letting your child have a computer in their room. That's just what I would recommend. Why do it? When you could go ahead and have it in the family area, and you could have it be in a space that there would be less opportunity and less temptation. Let's give them less temptation, okay? I would never personally allow a TV in my son or daughter's room that could do anything other than show a movie. And maybe you could have a screen in there that doesn't have a connection to anything, and you can use it to show movies. But that's how I would do it. Why? Because they can hack into the signal that's coming from somebody else's house and be able to get pornography on their TV. That happens. And we have to not suspect them of it, but protect them from it, right? And so to take some real steps there. In the conversation with a young man or a young woman who actually is struggling here is to do the same thing we talked about earlier, to love them and to be merciful first. To not shame them first, to be merciful first, and to say that God loves you right where you are, and I love you there too, but I love you too much to let you stay right there. I'm not going to tell you this is okay, and I'm not going to tell you that I want to see that we take some steps in the right direction. And if it's your own child, then obviously you have all kinds of things that you can set in place. If it's someone else's child, then there's a conversation of whether or not you should be talking to their parents, right? It's that maybe parents need to be involved with this. Maybe not. It's not a criminal sort of thing that you're obliged to mandatorily, but that you think of it from your perspective. If you were a parent and your child had this happening and somebody else found out about your child and they're starting to help them and not telling you about it, I would be pretty upset myself. I would want to be able to be in that conversation. So that's something to remember as well. And then to remember that the Eucharist is a beautiful place that our minds and hearts become reoriented back to purity. The Catechism says, His gaze purifies our hearts. When we go to Eucharistic adoration and we look upon the naked body of Christ, we look upon His body right there, unveiled. That shows us the pure heart of God, and through our own eyes, cleansing us of the images we have seen, and reorienting our hearts that we might again be able to see and love like Him. So, I know that's not a long answer, but we don't have a lot of time. I think we're just about over. So, if we have 2 minutes left, I'll show you a promo video.